Mr. Majewski's Anatomy 32 class lecture, Chapter 24, Digestive System, Part 2, Esophagus to the Liver. So, here again is the GI tract, this long tube that runs through our body. And let's talk about the generic layers of the GI tract. This is what you will expect to find in all of them, although it may be modified from area to area. So the first layer, the innermost layer that surrounds the lumen of the GI tract, is the mucosa layer. It has a thin layer of epithelium. After that there's connective tissue, the lamina propria, and after that is a thin layer of smooth muscles called the muscularis mucosae. You also find embedded into this layer are a number of glands, especially mucus glands, and some parts of the lymphatic system, as well as some blood vessels. After all, the second layer is the submucosa. It's mostly connective tissue. However, you will also find some of the glands that open into the lumen are embedded in this layer. There are also blood vessels, nerves, lymphatic vessels. The nerves actually form the enteric nervous system called the submucosal plexus, because the GI tract actually has a quote-unquote brain of its own. It can function independently of our central nervous system. The third layer is the muscularis layer, and as implied, there are muscles here. There are two layers of smooth muscles. The circular muscles that surround the tube, kind of like a sphincter, so if it squeezes, it'll shut the space. And the longitudinal muscles that go along the length of the GI tract, and which when they contract can shorten the length somewhat. So on this layer is the second part of the enteric nervous system called the myenteric plexus. And then the fourth layer is the outermost layer. It's called the serosa. It's made up of alveolar connective tissue and some epithelium, which is actually the visceral layer of the peritoneum. So, the esophagus. The esophagus looks and is named exactly like I just said, except the outermost layer of the esophagus is called the adventitia, because the esophagus is in the thoracic cavity and is not part of any serous membrane. The peritoneum, after all, is only in the abdominal cavity. Alright, the esophagus has an upper esophageal sphincter. This is to help control the passage of food into the esophagus. When the food, or at this point it's referred to as a bolus, enters the esophagus, it begins to be moved through the esophagus through the process of peristalsis. The way this basically works is that circular muscles above the bolus will contract, and that'll start to prepare the bolus down or along the esophagus. Then longitudinal muscles below the bolus will contract to shorten that section of the esophagus. Then as the bolus moves, this will then trigger the next round of contractions to continue the movement until it reaches the lower esophageal sphincter. And note, this is why you can swallow things while standing on your head. Esophageal disorder. There is gastroesophageal reflux disease. This is where someone is constantly having the contents of their stomach back up into the lower part of the esophagus. And this is because the lower esophageal sphincter isn't closing properly. And this can become a severe problem because besides the pain, it also can lead to destruction of the lower portion of the esophagus. The stomach is then the next area. The bolus of food will arrive into the stomach. And some of the functions of the stomach include mixing the saliva, food, and gastric juice that the stomach produces to form what is called chyme. At this point, the lingual lipase that was produced by salivary glands will become active and start breaking down fatty acids. The stomach also acts as a reservoir for food, a place for it to be stored for a short period of time. It secretes gastric juice, obviously, the enzymes and the acid that will break down the food. And it also secretes the hormone gastrin into the blood, which basically then tells the stomach that it needs to be doing its job. There are four main regions of the stomach. You have the cardia, which is directly after the lower esophageal sphincter. You have the fundus, which is a portion of the stomach that sort of sticks up above the cardia. You have the body of the stomach, which is the main portion of the stomach. And then you have the pyloric part, which gets broken up into the pyloric antrum, the pyloric canal, and the pylorus, which is the space that the chyme will pass through, that is surrounded by the pyloric sphincter. So pyloric sphincter at the inferior end of the stomach, controlling the movement of food into the small intestine. Here again is another picture of the stomach. You can clearly see here how part of the pyloric part looks kind of more like a canal over here. So, histologically, how do the layers match up? Well, the first layer, the mucosa layer, has a number of differences. One main thing is that it contains what is called gastric pits. And this is where the gastric juices are produced. If you take a closer look at this pit, you see that along the surface of the stomach are lots of surface mucus cells. These cells secrete a lot of mucus. It's basically this mucus layer that's protecting the stomach from the acids it produces. Then within the length of the gastric pit, you also have mucus neck muscles, cells, which secrete mucus as well. Lower down, you have the parietal cells. These are the cells that secrete the hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. The intrinsic factor is needed to absorb vitamin B12. Then there's the chief cells that secrete pepsinogen and gastric lipase. The lipase digests fats, and the pepsinogen gets turned into pepsin when it's in an environment that has got a lot of acid in it. And then it will digest proteins. And these are all exocrine gland cells. They are exocrine gland cells that are producing and dumping their products into a duct. Then there's one set of cells that are endocrine gland cells. This is the G cells, and they secrete the hormone gastrin. And this hormone gets into the bloodstream and basically stimulates the stomach to secrete gastric juice, increase its motility, and so forth. So basically, it's just telling the organ it's a part of to get to work. The submucosa layer is as expected. The muscularis layer is different in that it has 3 layers of smooth muscles. It has an outermost longitudinal layer of muscles, a middle circular layer of muscles, and then an inner oblique layer of smooth muscles. And then the serosa is as we would expect. The liver. The liver is tons of fun. It has 4 lobes, the large right lobe, the smaller left lobe, and then the smallest caudate and quadrate lobes. It has 3 main ligaments, the falciform ligament, which will attach it to the anterior diaphragm, the round ligament, which is a remnant of the umbilical cord, and then coronary ligament, which will attach it to the diaphragm. You will also find the common hepatic duct that feeds bile that's been produced by the liver into the common bile duct. There's the hepatic portal vein, which is bringing blood to the liver from the digestive system. And then there's the hepatic artery that's also bringing blood to the liver. In this case, oxygenated blood, because the liver is going to need oxygen to function. And then the hepatic vein delivers blood out to the inferior vena cava, so it can then be taken up to the heart. You also have the gallbladder associated with the liver. The gallbladder has its own neck, body, and fundus. It also attaches to the cystic duct that feeds the bile it stores into the common bile duct. The common bile duct will then take the bile from the liver down to a place where it fuses with the main pancreatic duct to form the hepatopancreatic ampule. And then, when needed, it will be released by the sphincter of the hepatopancreatic ampule, often known as the hepatopancreatic sphincter. And that will release its contents into the duodenum of the small intestine. So you got a right hepatic duct and a left hepatic duct that takes bile to the common hepatic duct. This leads to the common bile duct. It also can backflow into the cystic duct and into the gallbladder, or the gallbladder can release its stored bile through the cystic duct into the common bile duct. This all will then continue down into the pancreas, where it will fuse with the pancreatic duct to eventually be released into the duodenum of the small intestine. Disorders of the liver. Well, there's hepatitis. Hepatitis is anything that causes an inflammation of the liver. It can be viruses, it can be drugs and chemicals, it can be anything. However, we mostly think of hepatitis in terms of the viral forms out there, and they all are difficult to treat and can lead to long-term health problems and even death. So, the liver's histology. Well, on a cellular level, the liver is made up of hepatocytes. They are arranged in rows called hepatic laminae, and they produce bile. That is their main job. They run along the bile canaliculi, which are just ducts that are going to carry the bile from the hepatocytes into the hepatic ducts. Also running along the hepatic laminae are the hepatic sinusoids. These are highly permeable blood capillaries that are receiving blood both from the hepatic artery, which is oxygen-rich, and from the hepatic portal vein, which is nutrient-rich because it's coming from the digestive system. So that means you end up getting this reoccurring structure of these three vessels that are running together: the bile duct, the hepatic artery, and the hepatic portal vein. So you can see oxygenated blood from the hepatic artery and the nutrient-rich deoxygenated blood from the hepatic portal vein will come into the liver sinusoids. There it'll get processed somewhat by the liver, pulling out lipids, for instance, digesting any toxins, that sort of thing. Then it'll go to the central vein, the hepatic vein, out into the inferior vena cava, and back to the heart. So, the smallest structural unit of the liver is currently viewed to be the hepatic acinus, which is basically where you have the portal triad sort of as the center of the structure and the central veins on the far ends. And the idea is that you have these zones of the hepatocytes that are going to be treated differently depending on what's going on. So for instance, if someone is starving, then the cells closest to the portal triad will get nutrients first, which means the ones furthest away are the ones that are most likely going to die first. And then the reverse in the case of the ingestion of toxins. Functions of the liver. Well, the liver is very busy. It's involved in secretion of bile, which aids in emulsification or the breakdown of lipid globules, and the absorption of lipids. It's involved in carbohydrate metabolism, helping to maintain the normal blood glucose levels. It's in lipid metabolism, storing triglycerides and breaking down or synthesizing fatty acids. It's in protein metabolism, where it deaminates amino acids. This ends up leading to the production of urea, a waste product. It processes drugs and hormones. It excretes bilirubin into the bile. Bilirubin comes from the breakdown of red blood cells. It synthesizes bile salts that are found in the bile. It's a storage site of glycogen, triglycerides, and some vitamins and minerals. It has cells that engage in phagocytosis in order to destroy any invading bacteria. And it's involved in the activation of vitamin D that helps us absorb calcium. Gallbladder disorders. Well, the gallbladder has the problem that some people have its contents beginning to crystallize, so that they end up with little stones made up of crystallized cholesterol. And if these stones get caught in the cystic duct or the common bile duct or even in the ampule of the hepatopancreatic ampule, it can lead to blocking and backflowing of bile, which can be really painful and even deadly. And people who have this problem one way they can treat it is by a cholecystectomy, which is the removal of the gallbladder. And that's it for this part of the lecture.